I'm Harold Munro, editor-in-chief at the Vancouver Sun and province, and joining me is our legislative reporter, Katie De Rosa in Victoria. Hi, Katie.
Good morning, Harold. Nice to be here.
Okay, so legislature's still in session, so we're going to be very busy, but one of the topics that just won't go away is drug decriminalization, which was back in the news or stayed in the news last week. So maybe you can bring us up to date as to where we are. It's become a real political football.
Yeah, so Premier David Eby has consistently been asked, with all the problems that open public drug use in the streets, in hospitals, what are you going to do about decrim? The issue we had heard previously from nurses is that they can't even ask people they can't confiscate drugs, they can't call security because of decrim, and that has resulted in people consuming drugs in hospitals. Last week we heard testimony from Vancouver Deputy Police Chief Fiona Wilson, and so she talked to a federal health committee before federal MPs and said that BC police officers have no ability to intervene when someone is using drugs on a beach or in a hospital, and it's just not a police matter, is what she said. And so this really crystallizes that police have had their hands tied, and she said this was something that was brought a concern that was brought to the province before the decriminalization pilot started in January 2023, and it's there was a suggestion that concern wasn't really dealt with. So we saw Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Victoria on Friday, was asked about the future of decriminalization. He really put the ball in BC's court, saying BC initiated this experiment. We helped them facilitate it by amending the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, but basically leaving the issue with BC, saying he acknowledged there's challenges, but said BC will have to deal with the path forward. Again, we know Federal Minister Yara Sachs is planning to meet her BC counterpart, Jennifer Whiteside, so they will talk about these issues coming up. But again, when Eby was pressed about this, he's really hanging the future of decrim on the law that the province tried to bring in back in November, that says you can't use drugs in a bus stop, in front of a doorway. That is held up by the courts. That's facing a constitutional challenge. So the Premier says that is the best compromise, to allow decriminalization, but to restrict where people can use drugs, similar to restricting smoking and similar to restricting alcohol use. So that is really kind of hanging in the balance there.
Right. So you have to wonder if that law had not been struck down by the courts, whether this would be such a big issue, to the point where now you were telling me this morning we have a councillor in Surrey, another in Richmond, another in New Westminster, who are calling on the province to pull back on decriminalization. So it's not going away.
That's right. So it's an interesting collection of voices. Linda Annis from Surrey, Daniel Fontaine from New Westminster, and Alexa Liu, councillor in Richmond, have put out a joint press release saying they will bring notices of motion to their councils to call on the province to follow the lead of Oregon and reverse the decriminalization experiment. So interesting how they kind of got together to have a united call from three different councils, three different councillors rather. Obviously the respective councils will have to consider those motions, and we don't know how the vote is going to go, but it should bring up an interesting debate. Obviously cities have said, all over the province have said, they're having problems with dealing with open drug use in the streets. I know the Victoria mayor has said that, and so the local governments are the kind of front lines of this issue, and they're really calling on the Premier to do more.
Yes, in fact, we just had an opinion piece co-authored by the Mayor of Victoria, who is, I think, co-chair of the Big City Mayors Caucus in BC, which I think represents the 18 largest cities in the province. And she was calling upon the province to do something again about open drug use on streets. So it's interesting that Trudeau is saying it's in the province's court, because when this was brought in as a 3-year pilot project, the federal minister said at the time that we're going to monitor this, and if there are any issues, we certainly reserve the right to revoke it. So isn't it it's certainly within the federal government's jurisdiction to do that, independently of what David Eby and the province want to do?
I mean, it certainly is. And so that's why I think when Trudeau was asked about it on Friday, there was a keen ear as to what he was going to say. And it was clear he feels like this is still BC's issue. He made no hints that the province or the federal government was going to intervene. So maybe they think, sure, there's challenges, but they're not bad enough, or again, they think that the political heat is on the BC government rather than them. So, I mean, sure, that's not what Pierre Poilievre says, the leader of the federal Conservatives. He blames the federal government for greenlighting this project, but the BC United, for example, and BC Conservatives say this is on Eby. This is his, mess to deal with, or issue to deal with. So, of course, this program was, again, it is an experiment, and looking at what Oregon is doing is very telling, because even when there was options for treatment in Oregon, there was not a lot of uptake for it. So critics have said you can't put in decrim without a robust treatment system. And also, the issue of safe supply is a big debate, because advocates are saying we actually need more safe supply to reduce the reliance on toxic street drugs. But, for example, BC United Eleanor Sturco, MLA, has been saying there's too much diversion of that hydromorphone, of that quote unquote safe supply or prescribed opioids. So she's saying that those opioids are not going to the intended users; they're actually being sold and actually being used as currency by organized crime. So again, even the safe supply, which is very much tied to decrim, has been a problematic program.
Yes. Well, the Oregon example is a good one. Everyone is looking at Portland and what they've done there. They claim that they do have treatment in place, but it was, as you say, there was no uptake on it because they were handing out fines and cards to people, encourage them to go into treatment, to call about it, and finding that people were just throwing them away. So they're bringing in a new regime where I think they're compelling people to go into treatment, which again is a difficult one. I think at one point, didn't the Premier Eby say that he would consider that sort of approach, and then had to kind of back away in the face of some opposition?
Yes, before EB officially became premier, he told me that he was considering mandatory treatment for someone who repeatedly overdoses. Maybe they have a brain injury, they go into hospital, and he says, to protect that person, we think there should be mandatory treatment. That's something that's been, endorsed in Alberta, for example. But since he's said that, he's really walked that back and said that, after talking to, groups like the Canadian Mental Health Association and human rights groups, he no longer thinks that is the right approach. So, but I mean, Kevin Falcon, for example, has endorsed mandatory treatment. That is a platform that he's had in his mental health plan. So, the issue is still very divisive.
Right. And if Eby were to back away, and he, as you say, shown an indication at this point from decrim, he wouldn't be able to do that until he had something to put in its place. So do we have any sense of what that might be?
Well, again, a BC United MLA, Eleanor Sturco, she has said that instead of, a criminal charge, there could be administrative fines. So someone is handed a fine, they have a court date, or perhaps, and in order to get rid of that fine, then they have to go to treatment. So again, but someone could say, well, you can hand out a ticket, but if someone doesn't have the means to pay for it, how are they going to pay for it? So,
or if we don't have the treatment beds, which is the other concern, is that we haven't built up the supports necessary for those who may want to go into treatment at some point. Wow. Very complicated. And I guess the premier doesn't have long to sort this out with an election coming in the fall.
No, it doesn't. So the province has said they're ramping up treatment beds, but we don't even have a wait list. We don't know how many people are waiting for a treatment bed, or how many treatment beds are vacant at any time. And that's another thing that the government has been asked to provide.
Right. All right, Katie. We'll have another good week, and we'll have lots more to talk about next week. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Harold. Great chat.